I think that what got me is obviously being around a lot of vets and telling stories and all of that. And you hear some people have it less than others. Some people, I think that, honest to God, I think that I was too young and ignorant to understand what I was doing. And so my wife said that there were patches when I first got out, that she was, everything okay? I don't ever remember that. I just remember the transition from military to civilian. And I didn't realize possibly that transition, Jake can talk about that more, but, I didn't realize there was maybe some issues for a brief time. But obviously my horror, my darkness is definitely not as deep or as dark as other people. And when I'm talking to, people that I've met through the gun community, not just buddies of mine that were in my team or unit, but just general veterans, especially people that are, that got in and served post 9/11, because they fought a different warfare than I had to. We never had to worry about IEDs. We never had to worry about certain things that they're going through. Literally driving down a road every day, not knowing if they're going to make it. You never know. And hearing their stories when they come back. And the interesting thing is, the one that hit me was a guy said that, I spent every second of my time trying to survive. And Jay knows this, but most of us, when we're over somewhere, we're not trying to rack up kill counts. We're not trying to do anything like that. We're trying to get home. And let's be honest, we're doing everything we can to get home. And a lot of these guys and gals, they spend every day for 9 months doing everything they can to get home. And when they get home, they don't know how to be there. Whether it's from family or friends, they just don't know how to live in a non-chaotic world. And for a lot of those guys, the chaos of war, the fog of war is what's calming to them. And they don't know how to transition into regular everyday life. And that's kind of an interesting side that I take it for the podcast and all of that stuff.
You bring up an interesting point there about the transition from chaos into normalcy, because I think as family therapists, we try to encourage rejecting the idea that chaos is the normalcy, right? And so for somebody returning home from that crazy fog of war and all the stuff that comes with it, readjusting is really challenging. And I think if I'm going to try to sculpt this podcast in some way to our listenership, it's going to be to help understand the veteran community as they reemerge, right? So like whether you're a clinician listening or whether you're just a random citizen who's curious about mental health, and we happen to be having this particular topic, the important thing is to understand that it's a different experience when you've gone and been asked to take another human life or many human lives as a matter of job, that very few of us can even conceptualize. And how do we bring that back in and meet you where you are when you reemerge into regular citizenry, I guess?
I mean, one of the things that kind of strikes me with what you're saying there, I've had this conversation, I don't even know how many times over the years, like the past 15 years. Guys will come back and they'll say, it just doesn't feel right. What I'm doing now doesn't feel, and they use the word normal. And my line has always been like, first of all, nobody wants to be normal. Normal is boring, right? And what is normal? But part of the way that I have tried to help folks understand this is really a lot of what you were saying there. Sorry
Good
about
dog.
that.
Good dog.
Yeah. Which is, when you live in a chaotic state for an extended period of time, and then you come home and folks are like, flip that switch and we're going to go from like chaos to totally calm, whatever you want. You go to the grocery store, you get anything you want. I mean, I looked forward to care packages that came with stale homemade treats and like 100-degree sodas packed in them that maybe hadn't exploded, because those were things that I couldn't get. So when you go from when you go from this chaotic state all the time to this totally calm, you've become so used to chaos that chaos is normal for you. And when we ask people to step away from anything that has become their norm and transition to something different, it's uncomfortable as all get out. And the challenge is sticking through that discomfort until the new situation begins to feel as normal as the chaos. Because I think Trey would probably agree with me, the first few days, weeks, whatever that you're on the ground, it doesn't feel normal. I mean, I remember the first time, like Trey said, you hear an AK go off, and then you realize, man, the dirt is popping beside my feet. Or you hear something whiz by your head, and you're like, I got to get down. That does not feel normal at first. Over time, that becomes part of everyday life. So we become accustomed to the chaos. We come back and they're like, I mean, the most chaotic thing I've got right now is, 2 teenage daughters and a house full of dogs. How am I going to get somebody to band camp in the morning when I've got to get to work? I mean, that's chaos now. But, I see people sweating that, and I'm like, man, you're sweating that? I remember sweating like Trey said, like, I hope I don't blow up today. I hope we get from point A to point B and nobody dies.
Yeah, I think that kind of to add on what Jay was saying, it's the coming home. And I think that you're more involved in the transition, so you kind of see the after effects. But those first few days, especially when you come home, even if you're not transitioning out, you're still in, but you come home for 2 weeks or 30 days or whatever they're going to give you to stay home for a little bit to kind of decompress, if you will. The interesting thing is not what you have to deal with. It's reliving what you deal with family and friends. They all want to hear the war stories. They want to know. And it's not that they want to hear this, that, and the other. A lot of times it's your wife. It's your mother and your dad that just want to know, hey, you've been gone, and I'd like to kind of know what happened. Not because
they're just trying to identify. They're just trying to reconnect.
Exactly. They're trying to reconnect, but they're also saying, hey, if you tell me, maybe it will help you get through it all.
Right.
And the problem is you live that stuff. The last thing a lot of people want to do is now talk about it. And so there becomes a friction between that veteran and the family, whether it's wife or parents or whatever, because now you just want to forget, or you just want to move on for a few days. You don't even want to think about it for a few days, but all you hear are questions. And I think that probably doesn't help, if I had to imagine.
Is it possible just to move on, just to forget? Because I heard, earlier, Trey, you were talking about compartmentalizing, and that's something that we actually teach. And even in counselor school, we'd say, compartmentalize what you hear from your clients, set it aside, don't bring it home with you, all that stuff. Like it deserves its own space. And there's legitimacy to that, where he's saying, like, all right, I can deal with this thing, and I'm going to set it aside, and I'm not going to deal with it again. But that acknowledges that you're actually embracing it, you're owning it, you're moving on, as opposed to the compartmentalizing that I think most society teaches, which is just block it out, ignore it, but it still lurks in your unconscious and you haven't actually dealt with it. I'm wondering, is it worth what you're saying, where it's like, hey, let's just, like, I don't want to talk about that right now, babe. I want to be present with you and the kids and the dog and tend to the garden, and then maybe later I'll deal with this thing that I carried for the last 18 months or whatever. Like, is there legitimacy to that? Or like, how do you guys get trained to process this stuff?
I think that's the issue. Is I don't think that there is. I think that every person is going to deal with it how they deal with it. And I think, and like I said, I've been fortunate in my life to be able to compartmentalize things and be relatively mentally strong, I guess, because it's not that you put it in a box and you forget about it. You put it in a box and you deal with it when the time is right, when you need to. And then you have other points in your life where you're worried about family, you're worried about getting kids to dance, you're getting worried about whatever. And I just try, when I say I try not to mix many boxes together. That sounds weird, but that's kind of how my mind works is, I might have 10 things going on, but only 4 of them are ever going to mix match. I try to keep some things separate from others. I'll deal with everything when I can. But when you're talking about coming home, I think a lot of it comes down to kind of what you're saying. Some people won't ever deal with it. And that's what we're trying to talk about. There are people that either won't ever deal with it or don't know how to ever deal with it. And maybe that's just the 2%, but that 2% is so fragile in our community that I wish, that's what we're talking about. I wish there was ways that I knew to help, not just identify, but help them on a regular basis, because I think where a lot of it comes down to is most veterans feel that they are too proud, they're too macho. It is not manly to ask for help or to show any signs of weakness whatsoever. We literally in the Marine Corps have a slogan that says that pain is weakness leaving the body. And so that's kind of what it is. And we've all been on, the 3 of us have been on phone conversations in the last couple of weeks that we've talked about how do we break those stigmas down? How do we let people know that, dude, it's okay. It's okay to ask for help. And that's kind of where I am. And I'm sure Jay probably has a lot more. He's dealt with both of you guys have dealt with the clinical and all of that stuff much more than I have. But for the veteran side of things, I think a lot of it is just pride. And I think too many people have the pride. They don't want to deal with it, because if they deal with it, they have to admit that they are not an angel anymore. Their innocence has been taken from them.
Well, it's interesting you say that, like pain is weakness leaving the body. I would say that it's like pain is actually ego leaving the body, because neurologically we know that pain is probably loosely associated with sadness, shame maybe, and that's a neurological function that we can't avoid, because research through Carol Izzard's work and so forth has suggested that we don't have control over whether or not we feel an emotion. We have control over how much and how long we feel it. But there's this undergirded identity that you're not supposed to feel emotion. And that's not appropriate at all. And when that happens, what you've got is a neurological wrestling of sorts, where your brain is trying to not acknowledge the very natural response to environment, which says, holy crap, I just took a guy's life. That's sad, and I might be ashamed because it conflicts with my values, and I have a job to do, and I sign on. Like, there's all these like conflicting ideological beliefs, right? And if you can't reconcile those beliefs neurologically to make the brain get satisfied, then you end up carrying through into life this like repeated cortisol injection, or this dopamine injection, or this norepinephrine injection into your body as you keep having bad dreams and you keep reflecting on it, and it never actually resolves, because you haven't logically concluded through a belief system that what you did was okay or justifiable or however it works out. And then we end up with guys and gals who take their own lives because they can't satisfy or reconcile this conflict of belief systems. And I think that's where the neurology comes in. That's where what's their emotional functioning comes in. And that's where I think, I'm going to kick it to Jay here. People like him come in to help people understand that it's okay to be conflicted in your belief system, and then eventually arrive on something that approaches peace, right?
Yeah, and I think that from my experience, part of the reason that it was difficult is in the moment when you are there, you don't have time to process the feelings and the emotion.
Right.
That is when you have to, as they say, suck it up and drive on. My sergeant major said, if you stop and look back, that's when you die. Move forward. And so that goes on for months. And then by the time you get home, like Trey said, I mean, I I was fortunate. My dad was a vet himself from in the Army, Vietnam vet, and